everybody, it is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical, and if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, Happy New Comic Book Day. Well, I'm very excited to bring this review of a television show that came out just a couple of years ago during the pandemic, as a matter of fact, and it is another bit of a dive for me into this massive rabbit hole that I have actually been conquering in the last month, I would say, and that is exploring the beauty that is the Millarworld. And of course, that is the comic book universe that has been created by one of the most esteemed creators in all of comic book history, the living legend, Mark Millar. I mean, Mark Millar is, at this point in time, pretty much exploding. I would highly recommend that if you have access to podcasts or go on YouTube to take a look at his podcast, Millar Time. He has done everything from sitting down with various artists and writers, even his own daughter, who is now diving into the comic book world herself, and even former editors and executives of comic book companies. But today we're going to take a look at a show that was created from Netflix. This was after he had officially penned his contract with Netflix and created the show called Jupiter's Legacy in 2021. That, of course, stars Josh Duhamel, Leslie Bibb, and Matt Lanter. And this, of course, is based on his very popular comic book that he created alongside fantastic artist Frank Quitely. And this is a comic book series. There are 2 volumes, and then there are 2 more prequel volumes, and then there was a 3rd volume of the current Jupiter's Legacy continuity called Jupiter's Legacy Requiem, and it has just been announced that there's going to be one final installment coming in October called Jupiter's Legacy Finale, and I cannot wait to check this story out. So, Jupiter's Legacy is the story of a couple of people who were very much down on their luck because of the fact that it was, in fact, the Great Depression. And then out of nowhere, one of these specific people, named Sheldon Sampson, suddenly starts hearing voices about the fact that he needs to go on a quest to an island. And he needs to go with a specific group of people, including his brother Walter, as well as his best friend. And when they officially conquer this quest, they discover an alien race that bestows upon these people superpowers for the purposes of saving America and, of course, making the world a better place. So they create a superhero team, and they have very, very strict rules in regards to how they are going to use their superpowers. They are not going to use them for personal gain. They are not going to use them to influence politics, and they're not going to kill. So fast forward a couple decades into the future, they have kids of their own. There's been a couple of crazy events that have taken place in regards to breaking up the team to a certain degree, and now it's just about them picking up the pieces and at the same time trying to figure out how the legacy of superheroes that started with them is going to move forward into the future. So I personally thought that when I first watched the show, it was very good. I thought it was very dramatic. It was very deep. I personally love the whole concept of deconstructing of the superhero. The acting, I thought, was also very good. The visual effects for a television show were definitely on par with some very well done effects. I mean, I really do appreciate that Netflix did approach Mark Millar to turn some of his stories into films and television shows, because a lot of his work is very, very adaptable. I mean, I've said this before when I talked about the anime Super Crooks, which is also a fantastic show. When you take a look at movies like Kick-Ass and The Kingsman, those are 2 of the best comic book movies ever made. And it's just because of the fact that his comic books are very easy to read. They're very digestible. There's great relatability to characters. The atmosphere is great. The timing is perfect. So it's very easy to translate these books to film with, of course, changing a couple of things for cinematic value. And that's one of the few things that I specifically noticed in regards to Jupiter's Legacy. And many people who love the comic books would probably say the same thing. The story in the television show is very different from the story in the comics, because in the comics, we see the villain fleshed out right away. We see the aftermath of what the villain intends to do, especially when it comes to the Utopian and Lady Liberty's kids. They are very different in the television show than they are in the comic books, because Chloe is definitely a little bit more of a wild child in the television show than in the comic, and she really does mellow out as the story progresses in the comic. And Brandon, the son, is already in the television show a superhero trying to follow his father's legacy. In the comic book, he is none of that. He is very much against the whole superhero thing, and he just wants to use his powers for personal gain. He doesn't care what his father says. So definitely two different kinds of stories while still keeping the main meat of the story, particularly the origin, which is very important. But of course, in the end of the show, we actually do see who the villain is, and it is very much the same as the comic book, just done in a completely different way. So I think the comic is very good, but personally, now that I've seen the television show a second time, not only is it a very good show, I mean, I personally enjoyed it very much, but the part that really boggles my mind is why they canceled it, because we're not getting any more of Jupiter's Legacy. I mean, I honestly don't know what the general consensus is. I never really went onto any of the famous websites to see what critics reviewed it as or what fans thought of it as, but I personally thought the show was good. And I mean, I like Josh Duhamel, I like Leslie Bibb, and I really did think that the story was good. I also really liked the costume design. I think that they really tried to make these costumes look just like they came right out of the comics. And I also really loved the atmosphere. I think that the atmosphere of the story really captured, especially when it comes to the flashbacks, the 1920s and 30s very well. I also love the fact that Kurtwood Smith had a appearance in the show as well, and I love Kurtwood Smith, but there's a lot of that origin story that is not even in the comic book. So the fact that they had to really try and stretch things to make a watchable television show, if you will, I totally understand why they did it, and I personally didn't have anything wrong with it. So I don't know what the plans were if the show would have actually gotten renewed, because they could have still gone in the direction of where Jupiter's Legacy Volume 2 ended up. And I still have a little bit of the book to read myself. I've already read one of the prequel series. I read Jupiter's Circle Volume 1. Now I just need to read Volume 2, as well as Jupiter's Legacy Requiem. And of course, I'm very excited to get that all done before the newest and final installment of Jupiter's Legacy hits comic stores. But I will not understand why the show didn't do well and why it got canceled, and it sort of makes me a little bit afraid, because Super Crooks was great, and that of course only lasted one season because there really wasn't much more of a story to tell. They adapted the comic book, they even added a whole additional story as a prelude to the main story, which I thought was great, but I don't know what this means now for Mark Millar and his contract with Netflix, because I have still yet to see Chosen, which of course is adapted from American Jesus, and other than that, I really don't know what else they're going to be working on. I mean, I know that there's a couple of comic books that he specifically added to his Millarworld universe that were specifically done for Netflix, so I guess either he's waiting for the go to start turning some of these into movies and television shows, because I have read MPH, I have read Empress, I've read Huck, I've read Starlight. There are so many great stories that he has made, and his very first comic book that he wrote that was officially part of the Netflix contract was The Magic Order, and The Magic Order is going to be ending in the end of this year with Volume 5, so I'm wondering if that's actually going to become a television show, because I thought The Magic Order was fucking brilliant, and I really want to see that turned into something. But for now, Jupiter's Legacy is what it is. I personally thought it was good. I don't know what everybody else out there thinks about it, but based on the fact that I have now read most of the comics and compared it to the show, and of course, watched the show a second time, I really did think it was a good show. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. Please leave your comments in the box below. Let me know your thoughts on Jupiter's Legacy, and I will see you in the next one.